Hello, this is Ben from Ben's Kitchen and Garden. I'm showing you a bread recipe that's sort of an experiment and sort of just a different way to think about baking bread at home. So you can see this is the first mix right here, and there's a little bit of a longer clip of it, but what you see is that this is super wet. This dough is really soupy. It's actually more like a batter than it is a dough. And this is about 100% hydration, maybe just a touch over. And that means that there's equal parts water to flour. That's really high. So a lot of the bread recipes that I'll make at home regularly are probably somewhere in the 75% range. This is super wet. And a lot of the no-knead recipes are somewhere in the 70%, 60 to 70% range for hydration. And remember, that's water to flour. So you can see this is after it's mixed. And this is just like dripping off the dough hook. And this is way too wet to shape. This is way too wet to do much of anything with other than just let it sit and rise. So I'll include a link in the description for the recipe and more details on that, but this is just a yeasted bread dough that's just super soupy, just really wet. So it sat there for, this is about an hour. I just let it sit, didn't do anything to it. You'll see I'm just basically gonna knock the air out of it. And you can see a little bit of gluten formation, but not a lot. And stir it around and just sort of let it kind of pool up in the middle there. Now, the reason why I do this is because, or this recipe in general, is because I think that the no-knead recipes are great, and that's where I started baking bread. But kneading actually isn't all that hard. Shaping is really hard. Shaping bread is really hard. It takes a ton of practice, and it's just a challenge. It's a challenge for people that are like, extreme professional experts, 10,000 hour people, and it's even more challenging for brand new bread bakers. So I was thinking, what if you did a recipe that required no shaping? So this is why I cranked up the hydration all the way. You'll see I'm actually going to pour it into a loaf pan, but I just took out that shaping step. So this is after another hour, so we're at about 2 hours since that first mix. Just doing the exact same thing, just knocking it down, pulling it up in the middle, kind of just mixing it and folding over itself. You can see a little bit of webbing there right as it's sticking to the bowl. Not a lot, not a ton of gluten formation, just enough to kind of hold everything together, but this is not going to be like something that you're shaping a beautiful baguette with. And that's not the point. So you can see I'm lifting it up and you can actually see a little bit of gluten there. So it's starting to hold together just a little bit more than when I first mixed it. Now, here's kind of the trick of the whole recipe. So I oil this. This is my Pullman pan. This is an extra long, tall bread pan. It's my favorite pan to bake in. And all I do is I oil it up and then I dump this whole mess in here. So this is after about 3 hours of just rising on the counter. And you saw me doing those kind of fold, knock the air out of it type technique. And look at that. That is kind of unappetizing, but just super soupy, and then just pretty fermented and bubbling and active. And I love this part of the video because when I put my hand away there, you can see just how active this is. I mean, it's bubbling, things are popping, it's moving, it's jiggling. I mean, it's just really active. Look at that. That's pretty cool to look at. So I just threw it in the fridge while I preheated the oven. So that was only about half an hour in the fridge, and that's just so it doesn't overflow or keep that activity quite as high. I have a setup in here to steam it. This is not a great setup, but it's good enough for this. So I have this super rusty cast iron that's just in the oven, and I fill it up with water before I start preheating the oven. So when I set the bread in there, it's nice and steamy. This is at 500 degrees. This, just like that, uncovered, the steam going, will sit in there for about half an hour. And don't open the oven, just trust it. Half an hour is kind of a long time, but it's a good way to just let this rise and set. Now, after half an hour, I always take it out of the Pullman pan. So I'm going to show you here. This is just 30 minutes in there. You saw what it looked like when I dumped it in. It's just a big pile of yeasty batter, and it looks pretty nice. So a little bit of coloring on the top, which is nice. Kind of split on the side, which is totally fine. I'll pop it out of here and you can look at it. That is pale on the bottom, but looking good. Now, look very carefully and you can see a ton of little bubbles, especially on the top. They're a little bit bigger. But I'll show you on the front end and on the sides there, all those little blistering bubbles. That is really, really tasty. Flavor, crunchiness, just some nice fermentation, and ooh, look at that. Pretty. So this goes back in the oven. I ended up baking it for about 20 more minutes, and I think it probably needed I don't know, a good 10 or 15 more. So this takes a while, and that's partly because of all that water that's in there. You got to dry it out, you have to cook it all the way through. This is what it looks like when I pull it out. Nice coloring, again, those little blisters on the end, those little bubbles. Just pretty loaf. And that's pretty amazing because when we dumped it in there, it was super, super active, but just loose and wet and sticky and kind of gross looking. Smells great. Got a little dark on the edges there, but I'm totally fine with that. So all that's left now is just to let this cool, and then I'll slice it. I always put it on this little rack here. This is just a little cooling rack that is made for a 9x13 pan. I love it. It's perfect for loaves of bread. I can just set it on the counter. This is after maybe 4 hours before it felt fully cool, so this is quite a while. Now this is live on camera here. This is the first time I sliced this loaf open. I've done this recipe one other time. You can see right away it's kind of sticking to the knife. I can just tell it needs a little bit longer, which I'm fine with that. I mean, I can just put it in the toaster. It's totally edible. It's not raw or anything, just a little bit spongy. But look at that. That's pretty impressive. I mean, you get a nice crumb structure. You get some pretty open holes there. And if you look at the top, that's actually like a little bit of like a baker's grave or baker's canyon, they call it, where you get a little separation there. That's not ideal, but otherwise it's pretty good. So this is from the end, and I know this will be more cooked, which is why I pull it off here. That end piece is always better cooked. You can see, holy, but nice for sandwiches. Nothing's gonna fall through there. And you saw how little work that was. So instead of no knead, I'm thinking no shape. And I think I'm going to keep on this path because this is a pretty cool recipe. Thanks for watching.